Imagine the scent of pine and cinnamon, the sparkle of festive lights, the familiar carols. And then, your own father, with a chilling rage, tossing your thoughtfully chosen Christmas presents into a blanket of pristine snow. Your brother, a silent co-conspirator, offers a slow, mocking applause. 15 family members, faces alight with twisted amusement, erupt in cheers, as if witnessing the grand finale of a cruel theatrical production. This was my Christmas Eve. They believed they were banishing me from their domain, unaware that their festive cruelty was captured on camera, serving as the final, irrevocable violation of a secret agreement. Unbeknownst to them, the very roof over their heads, the home they so loudly claimed, had been mine, legally and completely, for 3 long years. That night, their gleeful celebration of my supposed defeat became the prelude to their own stunning downfall, setting the stage for the police to arrive and dismantle their entire world before the last carols faded. But to truly grasp the depth of that night's sting, and the monumental shift that followed, we must first journey back through the 8 years preceding it, a time where invisible contributions forged a silent strength. My name is Melissa, and I was 35 years old that unforgettable Christmas Eve. As my father's hands, fueled by resentment, scattered my carefully wrapped gifts across the icy lawn, and my brother's taunting claps echoed, a strange calm settled over me. They saw a woman broken. I felt the steel hardening within me. They were acting out a script they'd written for years, but I was about to introduce a plot twist they could never have authored. The warmth inside 129 Pinehurst Avenue, my childhood address, felt like a deliberate lie the moment I stepped across its threshold that evening. The air, thick with the aroma of pine-scented candles, the soft glow of golden lights, the comforting strains of holiday melodies drifting through every room, it all felt meticulously arranged, a theatrical backdrop for some impending performance. On any other night, the nostalgia might have enveloped me, but tonight it was a stage. A room full of eager spectators awaiting the next act. As I shed my coat, hanging it carefully on a hook near the entrance, a hush fell. That simple action was the cue. My father, Douglas, emerged from the hallway, a thick stack of papers clutched in his hand, his entrance so rehearsed it felt choreographed. His voice, amplified by the sudden silence, cut through the room. "Melissa, we absolutely require your signature this evening before the banks close." Conversations halted abruptly. Champagne flutes, suspended midair, froze. Garrett, my older brother, materialized beside him, wearing that infuriatingly polished smile he reserved for moments when he wished to remind everyone he was the esteemed Irving, the favored son. "Just a small family formality," he chimed in, his tone falsely casual. "We're simply leveraging the house as collateral. You'll sign, of course." I accepted the documents. Page after page, $250,000 here, another $250,000 there, a staggering loan application. My signature, sought as co-guarantor. The edges of my vision tightened, a familiar pressure building. "This obliges me to assume nearly $500,000 of your outstanding liabilities," I stated, my voice surprisingly level. Garrett scoffed, dismissing my concern with a wave of his hand. "You bring in close to $200,000 annually. Don't be so dramatic." Douglas's expression hardened, his jaw set. "This is our family home. You will assist your family." I drew a slow, deliberate breath, then returned the papers to him. "I will not be signing." The silence that followed was electric, charged with unspoken fury. Garrett broke it with a harsh laugh. "There she is, the selfish one, always predictable." Aunt Patricia, ever the loyal echo, chimed in. "Your parents sacrificed absolutely everything for your upbringing." Uncle Anthony quickly added, "Garrett, bless his heart, has been supporting them for years." Every fabricated narrative, every carefully constructed myth used to elevate him to hero status and cast me as the villain, spilled forth effortlessly. And then Douglas, with a calculated precision, delivered the blow he'd clearly been storing for years. "You are a profound disappointment, Melissa. If you refuse to aid this family, then remove yourself from my home." He then seized the gifts I had carefully placed beneath the tree, each one meticulously wrapped with gold ribbon tied by my own hands, and marched towards the open front door. A gust of snow swirled into the room as he flung the presents into the yard, where they burst against the frozen earth. Garrett initiated a slow, deliberate clap. One clap, then two, and soon, the entire room joined in. The humiliation was undeniable. It was calculated. It was public. It was a performance designed to break me. But they didn't know I had slipped my phone into my pocket, its small, glowing red icon capturing every single word, every cruel gesture. "Could you please repeat that?" I asked, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. Douglas roared, "Get out and do not ever return." I simply nodded. Gladly. I stepped onto the porch. Snowflakes drifted onto my hair, tracing cold trails down my skin. My gifts lay scattered, their vibrant wrapping already soaking through, ribbons unraveling like severed bonds. Behind me, laughter erupted, loud, careless, triumphant. They genuinely believed they had shattered me. They thought I would retreat, wounded and silent. They imagined tonight as their ultimate victory. They had no idea I had just recorded their fourth lease violation. They had no idea I owned the very house they were so eagerly throwing me out of. And they certainly had no inkling that in a mere few hours, I would be driving past that same porch, observing police cars arrive to deliver the one undeniable truth they never could have conceived. This was never their house. As I drove away from Pinehurst Avenue, the snow continued its gentle descent. My hands remained steady on the steering wheel, despite the knot of tension tightening in my chest. The searing humiliation still burned on my skin, but beneath it, an older, deeper ache stirred, a familiar pain I had carried for years. It was the kind of wound that forms slowly, layer by layer, until it becomes an intrinsic part of you. And to truly comprehend why that Christmas Eve cut so profoundly, you must understand the hidden landscape of the last 8 years of my existence. For 8 consecutive years, without a single missed month, I had wired $3,500 home. An automatic transfer, processed on the first day of every month, come rain or shine. All while meticulously crafting building designs for the prestigious Ridgeview Design Group, pulling 80-hour work weeks, and ascending the corporate ladder faster than anyone my age had before. I ensured that my parents, Douglas and Marilyn, never fell behind on critical medical bills, utilities, property taxes, or essential home repairs. This wasn't simply generosity. For them, it was sheer survival. When my mother's arthritis medication costs soared to nearly $800 monthly, I covered it without question. When my father's supposed retirement funds mysteriously evaporated, long before the bitter truth of his gambling addiction surfaced, I quietly filled the void. When the water heater catastrophically burst in 2020, I paid the plumber directly because they insisted they didn't want to burden Garrett. I meticulously preserved every bank statement, every email, every single transfer confirmation, not because I harbored a grand scheme to use them, but because, as an architect, one documents absolutely everything. A towering structure stands because every beam, every bolt, every hidden joint is underpinned by undeniable proof. I approached my family with the same principle, always preparing for the inevitable day when truth might finally matter. Yet, in the Irving household, truth was a fluid concept. Image, however, was everything, and nothing amplified that image like Garrett. Garrett, 3 years my senior, possessed an endless charm and a chronically irresponsible nature. He had been anointed the future of the Irving family since our earliest childhood memories. He could fold a simple paper airplane, and my father would boast about his nascent engineering potential. I, on the other hand, could win regional architecture competitions, and my father would merely pat my shoulder, offering a dismissive, "That's nice, honey. Just don't let it distract you from supporting your brother someday." I hadn't realized then just how chillingly literal he meant that pronouncement. Over the past 8 years, my quiet, steadfast support, totaling over $340,000, was gradually, subtly, rewritten in family lore as Garrett's selfless generosity. My mother would phone me after doctor appointments, sweetly recounting, "Garrett took care of the bill again. He's truly so good to us." Meanwhile, the pristine receipts lay neatly tucked away in my desk drawer. During holidays, Garrett would raise his glass, shrugging modestly as relatives lauded his devotion to his parents. He never once corrected their false assumptions. And through this, I absorbed a critical, painful lesson. Silence, too, can be a profound lie. This intricate web of deception reached its breaking point that Thanksgiving 2024, 17 days before that fateful Christmas Eve, the night everything began to unravel. The dining room was overflowing, 15 relatives packed shoulder to shoulder around the expansive oak table. The very table where I had completed countless hours of homework throughout my childhood. The turkey was carved to perfection, the air warm and fragrant with cinnamon and rosemary. But all attention, as always, gravitated towards Garrett. He stood imperiously at the head of the table, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir as if he had personally invented the art of wine tasting. North Peak Analytics is on the verge of closing a $5 million Series B, he announced, his voice dripping with self-importance. Japanese investors are fiercely vying for a larger stake. We're targeting an IPO by the third quarter of next year. The room erupted in thunderous applause. My father clapped the loudest, his face beaming with pride. "My brilliant son," he declared, resting a hand on Garrett's shoulder. "He's truly carrying this family into the future." Garrett offered his practiced, modest smile. Then, almost as an afterthought, my father turned to me. "Oh, and Melissa also has a job." The words hung in the air, light and dismissive, like a stray crumb brushed carelessly from the table. A job. I was earning an impressive $185,000 annually. I had recently become the youngest principal architect in Ridgeview's entire history. I was spearheading the design team for the colossal Seattle waterfront redevelopment, a $60 million civic project destined to fundamentally reshape the city skyline. Yet in that room, within the confines of that family, I was simply someone who also had a job. My cousin Bethany, ever tactless, inquired, "Melissa, what precisely is it that you do again?" Before I could even formulate a response, Garrett interjected with a dismissive chuckle. "She draws buildings, or something." Then, without missing a beat, he launched directly back into an elaborate tale about his strategic expansion into Asian markets. I sat there, a simmering heat rising in my chest, silently swallowing 1,000 words that I knew would never truly register with them. When the table erupted in another round of fawning admiration, I quietly excused myself, retreating to the kitchen to assist my mother, who appeared to be struggling with the heavy turkey platter. "You know," she began softly, her gaze fixed on the platter, avoiding mine, "your brother works so incredibly hard to keep this family afloat. You really should take note." I offered no reply, for what was the point? I had been covering her medication expenses since 2019. I had paid for the specialist who had treated her last year. Garrett hadn't contributed a single penny since 2018, the year he had attempted to invest their life savings in some ill-conceived cryptocurrency scheme that had vanished within weeks. But in their minds, Garrett was the epitome of the devoted son, while I was merely convenient, quiet, and easily replaced. As I drove home that night, the vibrant city lights of Seattle blurred through my windshield, and a stark realization slowly solidified in my mind. They would never truly see me, not until something utterly compelled them to. 17 days later, that something arrived. It began with a phone call from Garrett, interrupting my lunch break at the office. "Mel," he started, his voice taut with a forced casualness. "We urgently need to discuss the house situation." The house situation? That was his chosen description for being nearly $520,000 in debt, his investors rapidly pulling out, multiple lawsuits looming, and his entire startup teetering precariously on the brink of absolute collapse. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, recognizing the familiar edge in his tone, the one he always adopted when he desperately needed money, but wished the request to sound like a heroic gesture. "I simply need you to co-sign some paperwork," he continued, his voice attempting nonchalance. "Just a formality." A formality. Leveraging the family home, 129 Pinehurst Avenue, as collateral for $500,000. And in that precise moment, I knew. The crash was coming. Not my crash, but theirs. Because the very house they were so confidently planning to mortgage, the house they firmly believed my father had selflessly provided for us all these years, the house they thought I owed them unwavering loyalty for, had in fact been legally owned by my company, Irving Pines LLC, since 2021. It was a truth I had carried alone, a secret I had meticulously guarded, a reality they were profoundly unprepared to confront. A truth that would tear through the festive veneer of Christmas Eve like a relentless storm. And all Garrett could manage to say was, "You'll sign it, won't you? For the family." Garrett's voice, laden with a desperate plea, still echoed in my mind as I sat in my office at Ridgeview Design Group. The majestic Seattle skyline, painted in hues of deep blue, stretched beyond the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. I had ended the call with polite brevity, for politeness becomes a deeply ingrained habit when you're raised in a family where any confrontation only serves to carve deeper emotional wounds. Yet the tremor in his tone lingered, the kind of tremor a person experiences when the meticulously polished facade they've maintained for years finally begins to crack. "Just a formality," he had insisted. "Just for the family." Those words spun in my thoughts like dust motes caught in a shaft of sunlight, seemingly soft, outwardly harmless, yet utterly blinding in their collective deceit. I already knew, with an unsettling certainty, precisely what I would discover within those documents. Garrett invariably called me either when he desired something or when he was perilously close to losing everything. That afternoon, when his email finally materialized in my inbox, I opened the attachment slowly, with a deliberate caution, akin to peeling back a bandage that conceals a festering infection. Loan application, $520,000. Collateral, 129 Pinehurst Avenue. Co-guarantor, Melissa Irving. Exactly as I had anticipated. Nevertheless, I meticulously scrutinized every single line, not because I required any further clarification, but because Garrett consistently relied on people failing to pay attention to critical details. He constructed entire elaborate fantasies upon that very assumption. But I am an architect. Details are the singular reason structures stand. And this particular building, the one he brazenly planned to mortgage without my knowledge or consent, possessed a foundation he knew absolutely nothing about. A foundation with my name, not his, indelibly etched upon it. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a slow, measured breath. A familiar ache pressed against my ribs. 8 long years of invisible contributions, of carefully rewritten memories, of my sacrifices systematically erased from their collective consciousness. And now, they desired my signature so Garrett could perpetuate the illusion that he was still the brilliant son, the sole pillar keeping the family solvent. But there was a fundamental truth he failed to grasp. You cannot mortgage a house you do not own. As the office hummed with its familiar afternoon symphony, phones ringing, designers earnestly debating intricate sketches, the espresso machine hissing its rhythmic melody somewhere down the hall, I opened the bottom drawer of my cabinet and carefully unlocked a narrow metal safe. Inside, nestled securely, was a single, thick folder labeled Irving Pines LLC. Formed, July 2021. Sole member, Melissa Irving. I slid the documents out, resting them deliberately on my desk. The deed of sale, the foreclosure papers, the lease agreement, the meticulously detailed civility and conduct clause, and my attorney Jennifer's handwritten note from 3 years prior. Protect yourself. They won't understand this now, but they will someday. The memory of that summer, hot and humid, rose in my mind like a dense fog rolling in over the vast Puget Sound, slow, cold, and utterly inescapable. It all began with an unexpected notification on my phone back in 2021. A credit monitoring alert indicating a lien had been placed on the family home. Confused, a knot forming in my stomach, I immediately contacted the bank. The voice on the other end of the line, while polite, was clinically detached as they explained the grim reality. Mr. Irving has defaulted on numerous payments. The property located at 129 Pinehurst Avenue is currently in foreclosure. Defaulted, numerous payments, foreclosure. I distinctly remember sitting there, my gaze fixed on the rain streaking down my office window, feeling as though the very ground beneath me had begun to shift. My father had always projected an aura of unshakable financial stability, unwavering confidence, and absolute control. The notion that he could actually lose the house, the place where my mother meticulously stored her precious holiday china, where Garrett and I had marked our heights on the pantry frame year after year, felt utterly impossible. Until the clerk uttered the devastating number. Outstanding balance, $400,000. I didn't know then that this crushing debt stemmed from his gambling addiction. That painful revelation would only surface months later, torn from Douglas like a forced confession rather than a willing disclosure. But on that particular day, All I knew was that the house was slated for auction in a mere 2 weeks. 2 weeks until complete strangers would walk through the very place that housed every single childhood memory I possessed. I could have confronted him. I could have pleaded with him to reveal the full truth. But I knew my father. Pride was his absolute ruler. Shame, his relentless fuel. He would sooner let the house burn to the ground than admit he needed me. So, I chose an entirely different course of action. 5 days later, Irving Pines LLC was officially formed, discreetly named after the street itself, and shrouded in an identity he could never trace back to me. I attended the foreclosure auction armed with a cashier's check for $1.45 million. My hands trembled almost imperceptibly as I tentatively lifted my bidding paddle. It was terrifying. It was an immense burden, but it was absolutely necessary. The property flippers who showed up that day were efficient, impersonal, and purely calculating. They saw a prime profit opportunity. I, however, saw the singular way to salvage what meager remnants of family structure we had left. When the gavel finally fell and the auctioneer declared, "Sold to Irving Pines, LLC," the breath I had unconsciously held finally escaped me in a shaky sigh. The house was safe. But true safety, I understood, demands boundaries. Jennifer, my attorney, and one of the very few individuals who truly comprehended the intricate, often dysfunctional, dynamics of my family, meticulously drafted a lease agreement so airtight that not even the most dramatic Irving meltdown could possibly puncture it. $1 per year in rent, renewable annually, and the clause she adamantly insisted upon, a comprehensive civility and conduct provision. Violations explicitly included verbal abuse, public humiliation, false accusations, and any hostile actions. The consequences were clearly outlined. First violation, a written warning. Second, a formal notice. Third, a final warning. Fourth, immediate termination of tenancy. At the time, it felt extreme, almost draconian. By the close of 2024, it felt eerily prophetic. Because the harsh truth was, they had already burned through 3 violations long before that Christmas Eve. Violation 1. My father callously labeling me a failure at my mother's birthday party in 2022. Violation 2. Garrett deliberately telling my professional colleagues that I was mentally unstable in 2023. Violation 3. My father publicly announcing at Thanksgiving that I was a disappointment to the Irving name. Each warning was meticulously documented, each notice delivered and formally signed, and each one, predictably, ignored. By December 20th, when Garrett made that desperate call about the loan, the fuse was already lit. He just failed to realize how tragically short it had become. Back in my office, I carefully placed the loan paperwork and the deed side by side on my desk. On one side, Garrett Irving, demanding my signature out of an ingrained sense of entitlement. On the other, my undeniable legal ownership of the very house he so confidently believed my father still controlled. The contrast was stark, almost poetic in its profound sadness. I picked up my phone and sent him a concise text. "Send the full documentation. I'll review it." He responded instantly, his desperation so acute that he failed to question the unexpected calm in my tone. And as I leaned back in my chair, the winter sun of Seattle gradually sinking behind the bustling harbor, I whispered something I hadn't dared to articulate aloud until that moment. "This time, you won't rewrite the story, Garrett. Not this time. Because they weren't merely asking me to save the house. They were unknowingly asking me to mortgage something they had already irretrievably lost. And in just 4 days, on Christmas Eve, they would finally, brutally, learn the truth." December 23rd dawned with a kind of biting cold that felt almost personal, as if the very air itself was issuing a dire warning to brace for impact. I woke to 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from Aunt Patricia, and a veritable avalanche of text messages that stacked themselves on my screen. "Your brother is under so much pressure. Family always comes first, Melissa. Don't you dare embarrass us. Just sign the loan papers and stop being difficult. Garrett is desperately trying to save the house. The house, their house. The one none of them realized they hadn't legally possessed in years." By noon, the tenor of the messages had grown sharper, more aggressive. "Selfish. You've fundamentally changed. Garrett consistently supports your parents. You owe this family everything." And then, a true gem from Cousin Derek, the same cousin who had once borrowed $5,000 from me and never repaid a single cent. Loyalty is everything, Melissa. I stared at the message, incredulous. Loyalty espoused by a man who vanished every single time responsibility reared its head. It would have been genuinely laughable if it weren't so painfully predictable. At exactly 2:14 p.m., my phone illuminated with Aunt Patricia's name. I allowed it to ring out. Then it rang again, and again. On the fourth insistent call, I finally picked up, not out of any desire, but because I knew precisely what fabricated narrative Garrett had spun, and I needed to hear it in its full, embellished glory. "Melissa," she snapped, before I could even utter a greeting. "I simply cannot fathom how you are forcing your brother into such an unbearable position. He is trying so hard to protect Douglas and Marilyn, and you're just sitting there, in your fancy job, acting as if you're somehow above helping your own flesh and blood." I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, feeling the sheer exhaustion of 8 years settle bone deep within me. "Aunt Patricia," I stated calmly, "I have been helping this family for a very long time." "By doing what?" She scoffed, her voice laced with derision. "Sending birthday cards?" I almost laughed, almost, but the anger simmering beneath her blatant ignorance wasn't solely hers. It was the direct, bitter fruit of Garrett's masterful storytelling. He had painstakingly painted himself as the devoted son, valiantly struggling to keep the household solvent, while his cold, successful sister callously refused to lift a finger. The irony was suffocating. Before I could respond, her voice sharpened, cutting me off. "You are betraying everything we stand for. Sign the papers, Melissa." She abruptly hung up before I could utter another word. The phone buzzed again, instantly. This time, my mother. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice soft and trembling, adopting that specific tone she used when she desperately wanted something from me. "Garrett is truly doing everything he possibly can to keep us afloat. He's the only one genuinely looking after us." The only one? That line struck me harder than I had anticipated. I pressed the heel of my palm against my forehead, a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes. "Mom, please," she whispered, cutting me off with a practiced fragility. "Don't make a scene on Christmas Eve. 15 people are coming. Just sign the document so our family can remain united." Family unity, a phrase that in our particular household had always subtly translated to, "Melissa, sacrifice yourself quietly for our convenience." When I finally hung up, the profound silence of my condo felt strangely deafening. I stood by the window, gazing out over downtown Seattle, the distant hum of traffic below, the holiday lights glowing on every street corner. And for a fleeting moment, I genuinely wondered if my years of saying nothing, of quietly absorbing their narratives, had rendered me utterly invisible, even to myself. By 6:00 p.m., the situation had escalated dramatically. My phone buzzed nonstop, an incessant stream of notifications. "Garrett told us you're hoarding money while the family suffers. You should be utterly ashamed of yourself. Why won't you help your parents, Melissa? This is all your fault." Garrett had gone all in. He had masterfully positioned himself as the tragically collapsed hero, fighting a solitary, valiant battle while his supposedly burdenless. But for tomorrow, for Christmas Eve. I realized then that walking into that house unarmed, whether emotionally or legally, would be tantamount to walking directly into a meticulously planned ambush. I knew my family, their ingrained tactics, their predictable escalation patterns. I knew how swiftly a mere accusation could blossom into a full-blown public spectacle. And I knew, without an iota of doubt, that they would attempt to publicly dismantle me. But what they utterly failed to comprehend was that I had been diligently documenting their behavior for years, that the civility and conduct clause they had so dismissively signed was not mere decorative text, that the warnings they had so blithely shrugged off were not empty threats, that just one more violation, a single misstep, would activate the immediate termination of their tenancy. A clause they had never bothered to read. A clause written with surgical precision for exactly the kind of people who believed my silence inherently meant I lacked the capacity to fight back. And so, I made a decision that would irrevocably alter everything. Tomorrow, I would record, not out of vengeance, not out of spite, but out of absolute necessity. Because the only way to genuinely expose individuals committed to rewriting history is to present them with an undeniable truth they can never erase. I set my phone down, exhaled slowly, and allowed my racing heartbeat to gradually settle. Tomorrow they would push me. Tomorrow they would humiliate me. Tomorrow they would try to destroy me. But tomorrow was also the day the entire story fundamentally turned. They just didn't know it yet. Christmas Eve arrived with an unusual, almost unsettling stillness, the kind that feels sacred until it abruptly is. I drove towards 129 Pinehurst Avenue, the familiar Victorian structure rising like a cherished memory I once loved, now almost unrecognizable in its current context. My fingers grazed my pocket, reassuring myself of the slight weight of my phone. The camera app sat prominently pinned to my home screen, ready. I genuinely didn't want to record my own family, but I knew, with a sinking certainty, that they would force my hand. The neighborhood glowed with the warm, inviting lights of the season. Wreaths adorned every door. Children's laughter echoed across snow-covered lawns, their tiny footprints leaving fleeting trails in the pristine white. And then there was our house, my house, teeming with an almost overwhelming cacophony of noise, music, and the boisterous laughter of 15 people who had already unanimously decided on tonight's chosen villain. I stepped inside. A rush of heat enveloped me, carrying with it the cloying sense of pine, cinnamon, and an unmistakable aura of false cheer. The living room was packed shoulder to shoulder. Garrett loitered near the crackling fireplace. Aunt Patricia gracefully swirled champagne in her glass. Uncle Anthony was in the midst of retelling some wildly exaggerated version of how family sticks together, through thick and thin. The very moment I crossed the threshold, the animated conversations dimmed to hushed whispers. I carefully placed my coat over the back of an unoccupied chair. The entire room watched, every eye fixed on me. Marilyn, my mother, appeared quietly behind me. "Please, Melissa, don't make tonight any harder than it absolutely has to be," she murmured, her eyes steadfastly avoiding mine. Harder for whom? The words formed silently on my tongue, but I swallowed them, recognizing their futility. Nothing I said now would alter their predetermined script. Douglas, my father, emerged from the hallway, brandishing a thick packet of papers, the loan documents. He held them almost like a weapon, or perhaps a prized trophy. "Melissa," he announced, his voice deliberately loud, calibrated to command attention. "We need this signed tonight, without fail, before the banks close." His voice carried across the room, perfectly engineered to capture every ear. I met his gaze, my expression calm, controlled. "Dad, we've already discussed this. I cannot sign." "You will sign," he snapped, his control beginning to fray. "This is our family home, and if you harbored even an ounce of care for us, you would fulfill your duty." Garrett chimed in smoothly, almost cheerfully. "Let's not prolong this, Mel. Everyone here knows you can easily afford it." I felt the familiar presence of my phone in my pocket, and with a silent, decisive movement, I tapped record. "What documents are these?" Aunt Patricia inquired loudly, as if she had been patiently awaiting her cue. Garrett stepped forward, radiating a false benevolence. "Just some routine family paperwork. Melissa is assisting us in securing a loan." Assisting, not coerced, helping. I accepted the packet, allowing the silence in the room to swell, pregnant with unspoken tension. "Then this requires me to guarantee $520,000, I stated, my voice clear, using a house that I cannot, in fact, use as collateral. Douglas's face darkened, a storm brewing in his eyes. "Don't try to be clever with us, young lady. This is my house. You grew up under this roof." Garrett folded his arms, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Stop being so dramatic, Mel. Just sign the papers." I held the documents gently, then slowly lowered them. "I can't." It was as if the air itself audibly cracked. Garrett barked a sharp laugh. "Of course you woe. Classic Melissa. Big career, even bigger ego." Aunt Patricia stepped closer, her voice laced with venom. "Your parents have truly done everything for you." Uncle Anthony added, piling on, "Garrett has been selflessly supporting them for years. You can't even contribute a little." It kept coming. Accusations, rehearsed lines, deeply ingrained resentment polished into a public performance. Then Douglas delivered the ultimate blow. "You are a profound disappointment," he said coldly, his eyes like chips of ice. "After absolutely everything we sacrificed for you, when the family truly needs help, you turn your back." But I continued to record, every word, every nuance, meticulously captured. Garrett seized the moment, sensing a shift in the room. "She earns nearly $200,000 a year," he exclaimed, gesturing dramatically at me. "And still nothing, not even when we're desperately trying to save the house." Save the house. I lifted my gaze to him, the irony almost unbearable. "You have absolutely no idea how ironic that statement is." I held his gaze. "Name one bill you've paid in the last 5 years." He froze, just for a fractional second, but it was enough. Mom knows what I contribute," he stammered, his facade momentarily cracking. Marilyn's eyes dropped to the floor, avoiding all contact. The room sensed weakness, a shift in the power dynamic, and collectively turned, hungry for a new target. Unfortunately, that target remained me. Aunt Patricia hissed, "Don't you dare disrespect your brother." Douglas's voice rose, growing louder, angrier, filling the room. "If you refuse to help this family, then you can get out of my house." The recording captured every single word with crystal clarity. And then, as if possessed by some cruel, ancient instinct, Douglas grabbed the gifts I had so lovingly placed under the tree, each one carefully wrapped, each one individually chosen, and stormed to the open front door. "Get out," he screamed. He hurled them into the snow, ribbons snapping, boxes bursting open, the gifts scattering across the pristine white lawn like shattered fragments of something I had once deeply cherished. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Garrett, with a triumphant smirk, began his slow, mocking clap. "Oh, finally," he laughed. Dad actually stood up to her. The applause spread rapidly. 15 relatives, clapping, celebrating, cheering this moment of my public humiliation within what I had always considered my own childhood house. Marilyn turned away, disappearing silently into the kitchen without a single word. Garrett smirked, visibly basking in the performance. "Don't come back, Mel, ever." I lifted my chin, my voice unwavering. "Say that again for clarity." Douglas stepped forward, his voice booming with renewed fury. "This is my house. If you won't help your family, get out." I simply nodded. "Thank you." My voice was steady, almost eerily serene. I slipped my phone back into my coat pocket, its small red icon glowing faintly through the fabric, and walked slowly towards the door. The room watched, expectant, anticipating tears, a breakdown, a desperate plea. They received none. Instead, I said, "I'll go gladly." As I stepped outside, snowflakes drifted gently down onto the scattered gifts, their bright paper already soaking through. My hands trembled only slightly as I pulled on my gloves. Behind me, through the thick walls, I heard renewed laughter, the clinking of glasses, the triumphant cheers, all celebrating the exile of the daughter who had, for years, quietly ensured their lights remained on. I walked down the path, past the hallway lined with family photos, every single frame prominently featuring Garrett, not a single picture of me, not one. The bitter cold bit at my cheeks, sharp and bracing. I reached my car, inserted the keys into the ignition, and exhaled. 47 minutes of footage had already uploaded seamlessly to the cloud. The fourth violation, public humiliation, meticulously documented in perfect audio and crisp 4K video. I picked up my phone. "Jennifer," I said when she answered, "Yes, it's time. Execute the termination immediately." She paused, a beat of surprise. "On Christmas Eve, they just threw me out of my own house," I replied softly, my voice devoid of emotion. "And I have it all on camera." Her tone instantly shifted. "Understood. I'll contact the police liaison now." I made one final call. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher answered. "This is Melissa Irving," I stated calmly. "I need to report trespassers at 129 Pinehurst Avenue. I am the legal property owner, and they are refusing to leave." As I ended the call, the snow began falling harder, blurring the sharp edges of the streetlights. They thought they had utterly destroyed me tonight. But what they didn't know, what they could never have possibly predicted, was that this was the precise moment the story flipped. The moment the long-suffering scapegoat stopped playing her assigned part. The moment the landlord finally came home. Blue and red lights began to reflect off the freshly fallen snow even before I fully pulled away from Pinehurst Avenue. They painted the street in sharp, blinking colors. Cold, rhythmic warnings slicing through the warm, inviting glow still pouring from the windows of the house I once called home. I parked discreetly, half a block away. watching from the quiet solitude of my car as two patrol vehicles smoothly rolled to a stop directly in front of 129 Pinehurst Avenue. Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, softening the harsh edges of a scene that was about to become anything but soft. My phone buzzed. "Jennifer Lang, I'm 2 minutes out. Do not approach until I arrive." I exhaled slowly. My attorney always possessed an uncanny ability to keep things steady, even when the entire world felt like it was tilting precariously beneath my feet. Inside the house, shadows danced across the curtains, silhouettes of people still laughing, still drinking, still celebrating the moment they believed they had finally put me firmly in my place. They had absolutely no idea I was sitting in a warm car, observing the officers approach their home, eviction papers, and official county records firmly in hand. 2 minutes later, headlights cut through the falling snow, and a sleek black BMW parked beside me. Jennifer stepped out, her breath forming small clouds of fog in the crisp air. She tapped gently on my window. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm and firm when I lowered the glass. "I've been ready for 3 years," I replied quietly. We walked together towards the house, the crunch of our boots echoing sharply across the frozen lawn. Mrs. Keller, the elderly neighbor, stood on her porch, phone in hand, an expression of utter disbelief etched on her face. When she spotted me, she offered a small, knowing nod of solidarity. The officers, Detective Sarah Monroe and Officer Delgado, stood at the door. Douglas opened it, a smug satisfaction on his face, clearly expecting victory. "There she is," he announced, pointing dramatically at me. "Finally. You can take her away for harassment, or trespassing, or whatever ridiculous stunt she's pulling." Detective Monroe's expression remained utterly unblinking. "Sir, are you Douglas Irving?" "Yes, that's me," he puffed out his chest. "And this is my house." "Actually," she stated, her voice level and professional, "we are here regarding the illegal occupancy of this property." The room behind him fell into an immediate, stunned silence. Douglas frowned, a confused crease forming between his brows. "What are you talking about? We own this house." Detective Monroe calmly lifted her tablet, scrolling once. "According to King County property records, this house is legally owned by Irving Pines LLC. It has been since July of 2021. For a full, agonizing 3 seconds, no one in the room dared to breathe. Garrett appeared behind my father, a bewildered cloud obscuring his face. What did you just say?" "Irving Pines LLC, Monroe repeated, her gaze unflinching. "Sole member, Melissa Irving." Gasps rippled audibly through the room. Aunt Patricia's champagne flute slipped from her grasp, shattering with a sharp clang on the hardwood floor. Uncle Anthony muttered, "That's impossible." Douglas's face drained of all color, turning a ghastly white. "Check again." He barked, his voice desperate. "There must be a mistake." Monroe tapped her tablet deliberately. "I've checked 3 times, Mr. Irving. This property was foreclosed upon in 2021 and subsequently purchased at auction by Irving Pines LLC for $1.45 million. The silence that followed became suffocating, oppressive. Garrett's voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "But I thought the investor, Dad said and Mom said." Jennifer stepped forward, holding a neatly organized folder. "I believe these documents will clarify everything." She handed the folder to Monroe, who flipped it open. Inside, the deed, the auction certificate, the lease agreement, bearing Douglas and Marilyn's undisputed signatures, dated 3 years prior. Douglas stumbled backward, his hand flying to his chest. "What is this? This can't be. Why would she? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Jennifer's voice, calm and utterly razor-sharp, cut through his protests. "You signed a lease agreement in 2021, Mr. Irving. One that allowed you to rent this property for $1 a year." More gasps. Someone whispered, "$1?" Monroe continued, her voice clear. "The agreement also explicitly includes a civility and conduct clause. Violations include verbal abuse, public humiliation, and hostile actions toward any family member." She then lifted her gaze, directing it squarely at me. "And tonight, Ms. Irving submitted undeniable video evidence documenting a 4th violation." Garrett stiffened, his face contorting. "This is utterly ridiculous. Melissa is twisting everything. She's lying." I calmly reached into my coat and held up my phone. "Am I?" I pressed play. Douglas's furious voice filled the house. "This is my house. If you won't help your family, get out." Garrett's slow, taunting clap echoed next. The subsequent cheering, the cruel insults. The precise moment the gifts collided with the snow-covered ground. Every voice, every shocked face, every single witness. The room, moments ago vibrant with holiday laughter, transformed into an eerie graveyard of sound. Detective Monroe nodded solemnly. That recording is more than sufficient. Under Washington state property law, Ms. Irving is unequivocally within her rights to enforce immediate termination of tenancy. Garrett's chest rose and fell rapidly, his breath ragged. This can't be happening. You're evicting us on Christmas Eve. Jennifer folded her arms, her stance unyielding. Your family evicted Melissa first. You just didn't realize she was the landlord. That line landed like a physical blow, silencing all remaining protests. Douglas turned slowly to my mother, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. Marilyn, did you know? Marilyn didn't speak at first, then softly, her voice barely a whisper. I suspected. The betrayal etched on Douglas's face wasn't directed at me. For the first time in years, he looked utterly betrayed by his own illusions. Detective Monroe stepped forward, her authority undeniable. Everyone needs to vacate the property immediately. You are trespassing. Patricia sputtered, her voice high with panic. You can't just throw us out. Where are we supposed to go? Monroe simply shrugged, unmoved. That, ma'am, is not Ms. Irving's responsibility. Garrett's carefully constructed pride finally shattered, giving way to raw panic. Melissa, come on, we're family. I met his desperate, pleading stare. Were we family when you told 15 people I never helped our parents? When you allowed them to believe you paid for everything I actually covered? When you slow-clapped while Dad threw my gifts into the snow? He opened his mouth, but no words emerged. Douglas gripped the door frame as if the solid wood could somehow steady his collapsing world. We've lived here for 30 years. This is everything we have. I didn't flinch. And for 3 years, I said softly, my voice calm, you've been living here because I allowed you to. Jennifer addressed the officers. She'll need the property cleared before the locksmith arrives. Monroe nodded. We'll supervise. And just like that, the house erupted into utter chaos, arrogance swiftly replaced by panic. Garrett paced frantically. Patricia dissolved into tears. Douglas shouted futilely into a phone that no longer held any power. Relatives scrambled frantically to grab belongings they mistakenly believed they owned. I stepped back, observing the swift, brutal unraveling of a dynasty built entirely on self-serving delusion. They had celebrated my public humiliation merely an hour ago. Now, they were being unceremoniously escorted out of my own house. Snow drifted softly through the open doorway as the last of them shuffled onto the porch, their faces pale and drawn beneath the harsh, flashing lights. The flip was complete. This was not their house. It was mine. And tonight, they finally understood precisely what that meant. The biting cold outside felt even sharper after the police had cleared the house, as if the very air itself had shifted its allegiance. The relatives huddled together on the porch, wrapped in thin party coats utterly unsuited for an eviction in the snow. The flashing patrol lights cast long, fractured shadows across the pristine white landscape. Their whispers, once filled with superior disdain, now trembled with raw fear. Jennifer and I stepped back inside 129 Pinehurst Avenue. The house was suddenly quiet, a profound stillness I had never once experienced growing up within its walls. Calm, controlled. Mine. 20 minutes later, after the officers had escorted the last of the stunned relatives out, Detective Monroe returned to the doorway. Ms. Irving, the property is secure. Do you wish for them to be allowed back in for formal tenant processing? I nodded once. Bring in my parents and my brother only. The others, I added, my gaze sweeping over the huddled figures, can wait outside in the cold they helped create. Douglas entered first, his shoulders hunched, his face utterly drained of its earlier holiday smugness. Marilyn followed quietly, her eyes downcast. Garrett came last, moving like a man who had just navigated the wreckage of his own carefully constructed mythology. Jennifer set her sleek leather briefcase on the dining table and opened it with practiced, professional precision. The quiet click of the latch echoed through the now silent room. Mr. and Mrs. Irving, she began, sliding a stack of documents forward. Melissa is prepared to offer a formal rental agreement. Douglas blinked slowly, as if the words simply failed to register. Rental agreement. You're letting us stay for market rate? Jennifer clarified, her voice unwavering. $8,500 per month. First month last month, and a security deposit due upon signing. Total. $25,500. Garrett choked, a strangled sound escaping him. You can't be serious. Jennifer lifted a brow, her expression cool. This is standard for a 4-bedroom Victorian in this neighborhood. If anything, it's generous. Douglas sagged into a chair, his voice cracking, frail. We don't have that kind of money. That, Jennifer replied calmly, her tone devoid of sympathy, is not the landlord's concern. The word landlord struck him like a physical slap. In all his years of self-proclaimed authority, Douglas had never once imagined a reality where he wasn't the undisputed ruler of this house, much less a tenant begging his own daughter for shelter. But tonight, reality didn't require his permission. Jennifer pulled out yet another document. Additionally, the lease includes a behavioral addendum. No verbal abuse, no public humiliation, no defamatory statements toward the landlord. Garrett stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Yes, Jennifer interrupted smoothly, her gaze firm. We can. One violation results in immediate eviction. No second chances. Marilyn whispered, her voice barely audible. Olivia, Melissa, please. Her voice broke on my name, but I maintained my steady expression. This is business, nothing more. Douglas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. You're humiliating us. No, I said quietly, my voice calm and clear. You did that yourselves. I'm simply offering terms. Garrett looked frantically between us, his eyes wild with dawning comprehension. If we sign this, we lose everything. You lost everything, Jennifer corrected, her voice precise, when you violated the civility and conduct clause for the 4th time. Silence. Douglas's hand trembled perceptibly as he picked up the pen. His signature, once bold and sweeping, was now a weak, shaky line across the page. Marilyn signed next, her movements devoid of hesitation, only profound sorrow. Then the pen slid to Garrett. He stared at the papers as if they were a death sentence. And in a way, they were. Not physically, but socially, emotionally. The golden child, the family's unwavering pride, reduced to signing a lease like a man who had never genuinely supported his parents, never paid a single bill, never truly built anything real. Tears welled in his eyes. This will destroy me. It didn't have to, I replied, my voice steady. You made choices, now they have consequences. He signed. The ink had barely dried before phones across the neighborhood began vibrating incessantly. Notifications chimed from every pocket. Mrs. Keller, the vigilant neighbor, had recorded the entire scene. The police presence, the raised voices, the final, humiliating eviction. And as I stepped towards the large bay window, I saw her standing outside, showing her glowing screen to other curious neighbors. The caption on her video glowed brightly. When the daughter you called worthless turns out to own the house. Within minutes, the clip spread like wildfire across neighborhood group chats and local forums. Within an hour, it hit Seattle's prominent social media pages. By morning, it would explode far beyond the confines of the city. While we were finalizing signatures, Garrett's phone buzzed incessantly. He ignored it for a while until one particular call refused to cease. He stepped away from the table to answer. Mr. Blake, he said weakly, his voice a mere thread. Yes, I can explain. No, it's not what it looks like. Please, let me. But the man on the other end offered no soothing words, no reassurance, no salvation. Garrett held the phone away from his ear as the furious voice blasted through the speaker. Donovan Blake, his American investor, was clearly watching the viral eviction video in real time. You lied about the assets, Blake shouted. You used a house you don't even own as collateral. We're withdrawing everything. North Peak Analytics is dead? The line went silent. Garrett's face utterly collapsed. He looked up at me, not with anger, not with entitlement, but with something he had never shown before, genuine, raw fear. Melissa, he whispered, his voice broken, what am I supposed to do? For the first time in years, I answered him with unvarnished honesty. Start over, like the rest of us did, without shortcuts. He said nothing. 1 year later, Pinehurst Avenue felt different. The neighbors still nodded to me, but now with a quiet respect they had never shown before. Some even stopped me to inquire about my well-being, how work was progressing, how the house renovations were coming along. I always offered a polite smile and a brief update. Garrett eventually secured a job, a Starbucks barista at the busy Ballard location. He never boasted there. He had nothing left to boast about. Douglas became a Walmart greeter on Aurora Avenue, a job he visibly resented but desperately needed. The man who once proudly boasted about single-handedly carrying the family now merely directed strangers to the winter coat section. Marilyn went to therapy weekly. She occasionally sent me postcards, never asking for a reply. The rent arrived on the first of every month, $8,500, on time always. Sometimes I didn't open the envelopes right away. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need the money. Every dollar, every single payment, went directly into the Pinterest Women in STEM Fund. 5 young women that first year, then 10. Girls who had been silenced or overlooked by their own families, just as I had been. Girls who undeniably deserved better. And whenever I attended a scholarship ceremony or shook the hand of a student whose eyes glowed with pure possibility, I felt the same quiet realization. My family's downfall wasn't my victory. My freedom was. By spring, the Pinterest neighborhood had settled into its new, unexpected rhythm. But the most profound transformation didn't occur within the walls of 129 Pinterest Avenue. It unfolded far beyond it, inside quiet classrooms, bustling engineering labs, and student workspaces illuminated by the soft hum of fluorescent lights. That was where the real legacy now lived. Because every rent payment my parents sent, every deposit they made out of reluctance or lingering pride or quiet resignation flowed into something far larger than any of us. The Pinterest Women in STEM Fund. It began modestly. 5 scholarships, each for $20,000. 5 young women from challenging households, each of them carrying familiar wounds I recognized instantly. The pain of being overlooked, the sharp sting of being underestimated, the deep frustration of knowing your capabilities while the very people who should champion you either moved the goalposts or pretended not to see you at all. There was Sarah Kim, whose father had casually told her that coding was for boys with nothing better to do. She showed me her mobile app prototype at the scholarship luncheon, shy at first, then absolutely glowing when I sincerely told her it was brilliant. There was Maria Delgado, who meticulously balanced demanding engineering classes with a demanding part-time job, because her parents adamantly insisted that money spent on daughters was wasted. Her intricate designs for sustainable water systems looked like something Ridgeview would eagerly pay good money to develop. And Lee Thompson, only 19, whose eyes held the familiar, cautious hesitation of someone who had been dismissed so often that she learned to speak softly, almost apologetically, just to avoid being corrected. She confided in me that she wanted to design earthquake-resistant housing. I told her, with absolute certainty, that the world needed minds like hers far more than it knew. Each time I shook their hands, each time they expressed their gratitude, I felt something profound rearrange within me. Something tender. Something unburdened. It was as if I was building a new foundation, not made of concrete or steel, but of every version of the girl I used to be, finally allowed to stand tall and unapologetic. What I didn't anticipate was the speed with which the fund grew. The video of the Pinerist eviction, the pivotal moment my father shouted that it was his asterisk house, followed by the officers calmly clarifying that it was decidedly not, spread virally far beyond Seattle. It bounced across countless platforms, stitched into commentary videos, featured in reaction streams, and dissected in podcast discussions. People earnestly debated boundaries, entitlement, financial abuse, and the resilience of quiet daughters who often turned out to be the unacknowledged backbone of their families. The clip reached corporate circles. It reached philanthropists. It reached powerful women with daughters of their own. And within 4 short months, Ridgeview Design Group, along with several prominent tech firms along the Seattle waterfront, reached out, eager to contribute. Amazon matched Ridgeview's substantial donation. Microsoft generously offered grants. By summer, the Pinerist Fund had swelled to what many described as a small miracle. $500,000 pledged for the upcoming academic year. I used to painstakingly build structures on paper, in meticulously crafted models, in CAD files glowing on a monitor at 2 in the morning. But this was a structure built out of second chances and profoundly reclaimed stories. And for the very first time, no one was lurking behind me, attempting to steal credit. 1 year after the eviction, I returned to the University of Washington campus for the fund's annual ceremony. The room buzzed with an infectious excitement, a room full of bright, hopeful girls who served as a powerful reminder that resilience speaks far louder than bloodlines. When I walked onto the stage to speak, I noticed a message flash on a screen backstage. Your parents submitted rent early this month. I smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. Of course they had. I cleared my throat and addressed the attentive audience. A year ago, I began, my voice clear and steady, I learned that sometimes the very people who claim to love you will actively silence you until the day you finally stop letting them. And sometimes, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's absolutely necessary. Faces in the audience softened. Several girls nodded in silent understanding. I once believed freedom meant simply leaving something painful behind, I continued, allowing my gaze to sweep across the room. But true freedom can also mean constructing something entirely new, something that extends to others the opportunities you weren't given. A pause, a deep breath, a truth I no longer feared to speak. This fund isn't merely about where I came from. It's profoundly about where all of you are going. When the applause rolled across the auditorium, warm and rising, I felt a strange, profound sensation, like a heavy weight I had unknowingly carried since childhood had finally, completely dissolved. That night, I returned to my condo overlooking the shimmering Seattle waterfront, changed out of my formal suit, and sat by the window as the city lights twinkled across the dark water. In the distant haze, I could barely discern Pinerist Avenue. A year ago, I might have stared in that direction with a heavy heart, with lingering anger, with something deeply unresolved. But not anymore. Now, that house was simply a building, a structure, one I managed professionally, devoid of emotion, precisely the way landlords do. My father still pointedly avoided looking at me when I stopped by for scheduled inspections. My mother tried softly, hesitantly, to bridge the lingering gap with small kindnesses, fresh cookies, handwritten notes left on the kitchen counter. I maintained a cordial, businesslike demeanor, keeping my boundaries firm. Garrett never attempted reconciliation. Last I heard, he was still working at the Starbucks in Ballard, meticulously crafting lattes for students who unknowingly stood beside a man whose greatest downfall had been his unshakable belief that he was utterly untouchable. As for me, I didn't harbor hatred towards them. They simply no longer had access to me, and that, in itself, was its own profound kind of peace. By the close of December, I sat in my office at Ridgeview, meticulously finalizing architectural plans for the next phase of the waterfront redevelopment. Outside, the city prepared for another Christmas season, lights strung gracefully across the boardwalk, carolers drifting past, the sky threatening to deliver a gentle snowfall. 1 year earlier, I had been unceremoniously thrown out into the bitter cold. Now, the warmth I felt had absolutely nothing to do with the external weather. It came from choosing myself, from standing up when silence had been the easier path, from the profound realization that walking away wasn't about losing a family. It was about finding myself. As the clock edged nearer to midnight, I pressed save on the final draft of the building design and turned towards the camera I use for sharing my story. Before I go,